1990s. The internet was still new, search was confusing, websites were scattered everywhere, and one name felt like the front door of the web: Yahoo. Not just a company, not just a website, a starting point. News, email, finance, sports, search, everything in one place. For millions of people, the internet did not begin with a browser, it began with Yahoo. But here's the question that slowly started forming years later. If a company once controlled how the world entered the internet, how could a single leadership vision fail to protect that power? And more importantly, when did the shift actually begin? To understand that, we need to move forward in time. By the late 2000s, the internet no longer needed a single front door. Search engines had become more intelligent. Social platforms were reshaping how people discovered information. Smartphones were beginning to change how users interacted with digital services every hour of the day. The web was no longer something people entered, it was something they lived inside. Yahoo was still one of the biggest internet brands in the world, but its original advantage was quietly losing importance. Being everywhere was no longer enough if users were forming habits inside specific ecosystems that did not depend on portals. Inside the company, leadership turnover and strategic uncertainty made one thing clear: Yahoo needed a reset, not just operational improvement, but a redefinition of what the company would be in a mobile-driven, platform-dominated internet. In 2012, Yahoo made one of the most talked about executive appointments in technology history. Marissa Mayer became CEO after more than a decade helping shape core products at Google. Her hiring immediately framed Yahoo's future around product reinvention and technological modernization. The New York Times introduced the moment with the headline, "Yahoo hires Google executive Marissa Mayer as CEO," presenting the move as a decisive attempt to restore competitive strength through product leadership. Expectations formed quickly because her background symbolized exactly what Yahoo appeared to need: deep engineering culture, strong product design discipline, data-driven decision-making. The strategy she introduced focused on making Yahoo faster, cleaner, and mobile first. Major services were redesigned, performance improvements were prioritized. The company began acquiring startups to inject new talent and accelerate innovation. Internal culture was reshaped around speed and execution. Early industry reactions suggested the plan might be working. Bloomberg Businessweek captured that early optimism in the headline, "Marissa Mayer's plan to revive Yahoo shows early promise," highlighting product redesign momentum and renewed energy across the company's core platforms. But while visible improvements were happening, analysts began watching something deeper. The structure of the internet economy had fundamentally changed. Long-term dominance was no longer defined by traffic volume alone. It was defined by control over ecosystems that shaped user behavior continuously. Search infrastructure, mobile operating systems, social networks, and targeted advertising platforms had become the foundations of digital power. Yahoo was improving its products, but observers began asking whether those improvements aligned with where influence was actually concentrating. Business Insider reflected this growing concern with the headline, "Yahoo is improving products but still lacks a clear identity," pointing to uncertainty about what strategic position Yahoo was truly building for the future. At the same time, investment activity accelerated. Yahoo purchased dozens of smaller companies, expanded its digital media presence, and attempted to compete across multiple emerging sectors. Each move aimed to secure relevance in a fast-changing environment. However, expanding into many areas did not necessarily create dominance in any single one. Competitors were concentrating resources into tightly controlled ecosystems that captured user attention more directly and more consistently. Yahoo's strategy emphasized broad modernization, while the industry's largest power centers were forming around depth of control. The distinction between those two approaches became more significant with each passing year. External pressure began building gradually rather than suddenly. Performance improvements existed, but so did persistent strategic questions. Could product redesign alone restore structural influence? Could expansion across multiple domains compensate for the absence of a clearly defined ecosystem? Reuters captured this moment of evaluation with the headline, "Turnaround efforts at Yahoo face growing pressure," reflecting increasing scrutiny from investors and analysts who were no longer measuring success only by internal progress but by competitive positioning within the broader technology landscape. This accumulation of pressure eventually led to a turning point that redefined how the market valued Yahoo's future. The company that once organized access to the internet became the subject of acquisition negotiations. When core operating assets were ultimately purchased by Verizon Communications, the transaction signaled more than a change in ownership. It marked the end of Yahoo's role as an independent force shaping how users entered the digital world. The deeper story is not simply that Yahoo Yahoo was sold. The deeper story is how leadership vision, product strategy, and structural market shifts interacted over time to make that outcome possible. Understanding those decisions requires looking closely at what Yahoo chose to prioritize, what it chose to pursue, and what it failed to secure while the internet reorganized around it. As the turnaround strategy moved forward, Yahoo's leadership focused heavily on rebuilding relevance through product expansion and audience growth. One of the most significant decisions came in 2013 when Marissa Mayer approved one of the company's largest acquisitions. Yahoo purchased Tumblr for approximately $1.1 billion. The logic behind the deal was straightforward. Tumblr had a younger user base, strong engagement, and cultural relevance that Yahoo had struggled to maintain. By integrating Tumblr, Yahoo aimed to rebuild its position in social media, increase mobile usage, and capture long-term advertising growth tied to younger audiences. The announcement immediately drew global attention. The Wall Street Journal introduced the deal with the headline, "Yahoo to buy Tumblr for $1.1 billion, framing it as a bold attempt to regain cultural and technological momentum. From a strategic perspective, the acquisition represented more than expansion. It represented an effort to reposition Yahoo within a digital environment increasingly defined by social interaction and user-generated content. If successful, Tumblr could have provided Yahoo with a powerful platform for engagement that extended beyond traditional portal services. However, integrating cultural platforms into large corporate structures is rarely simple. Tumblr's growth slowed after the acquisition. Advertising integration proved more difficult than expected. User behavior did not shift in ways that produced the long-term revenue scale Yahoo needed. Instead of becoming a central pillar of Yahoo's future ecosystem, Tumblr remained an asset without full strategic leverage. Over time, the gap between acquisition cost and measurable return became increasingly visible. Analysts began viewing the purchase less as a growth engine and more as a signal of how urgently Yahoo was searching for relevance. At the same time, Yahoo continued investing across multiple fronts. Digital media expansion, mobile product redesign, content partnerships, and advertising technology improvements all remained active priorities. Internally, these efforts represented modernization. Externally, they created a more complex perception. Observers began questioning whether Yahoo's strategy was building a focused competitive structure or distributing resources across too many parallel efforts. Market influence in the modern technology economy depended less on participation across many services and more on controlling foundational platforms that shaped user behavior continuously. By the mid-2000s, financial pressure and strategic evaluation intensified simultaneously. Growth expectations remained high, but structural advantages remained unclear. CNBC captured the shift in tone with the headline, "Investors Grow Frustrated with Yahoo's Turnaround Progress," reflecting rising concern that measurable transformation was not matching the scale of investment and strategic activity. The issue was no longer whether Yahoo was trying to change. The issue was whether those changes were building durable competitive power. As pressure increased, attention turned toward Yahoo's most valuable remaining assets. Large technology companies began evaluating the company not as a dominant independent platform, but as a collection of services, user bases, and infrastructure that could be absorbed into larger corporate ecosystems. This shift in perception marked a fundamental turning point. Yahoo was no longer being measured primarily by its potential recovery. It was being measured by its acquisition value. In 2016, the defining outcome became official. Verizon Communications agreed to purchase Yahoo's core internet operations for approximately $4.8 billion. Major financial publications immediately framed the moment as the closing chapter of an era. The New York Times reported the event with the headline, "Verizon agrees to buy Yahoo's core business," presenting the transaction as the final transformation of a company that had once shaped how the world accessed the web. The scale of that shift becomes clearer when placed in historical context. At its peak, Yahoo had been valued at tens of billions of dollars and functioned as one of the most influential gateways to digital information. The acquisition price represented not only a financial revaluation, but a structural redefinition of what the company represented within the technology landscape. Yahoo was no longer an organizing force of the internet. It had become a set of assets integrated into a larger communications infrastructure. Looking back across the full timeline, timeline, the outcome did not result from a single failed decision or one isolated strategic error. The transformation unfolded through a sequence of choices made during a period when the internet itself was reorganizing around new forms of power. Portal dominance gave way to ecosystem control. Broad service coverage gave way to deep behavioral integration. Product improvement did not always translate into structural influence. Acquisition did not always translate into platform control. Expansion did not always translate into long-term positioning. Leadership vision focused on modernization, growth, and renewed relevance. But the competitive environment increasingly rewarded concentrated control over foundational digital systems. That difference shaped the trajectory that followed. The same company that once defined how users entered the internet ultimately operated within systems defined by others. And that is how Yahoo's story reached its turning point. Not through sudden collapse, but through gradual strategic misalignment during one of the most transformative periods in digital history. A company that once stood at the center of the web found itself navigating an internet that no longer revolved around gateways at all.